A puppy tied to 100 balloons floated to his death, and then a cop did the unthinkable. At first, it looked like a cruel prank, something so outrageous people didn't believe it was real. But when one officer refused to walk away, he uncovered a trail of secrets darker than anyone imagined. Behind the balloons was something far bigger: power, money, and people who would do anything to keep the truth buried. The deeper he pushed, the more dangerous it became, until lives, not just the puppies, were hanging by a thread. What could drive a man to risk everything, even his own badge, for justice? And how far would the powerful go to silence him before the truth explodes? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The video hit social media like a thunderbolt on a quiet Tuesday morning. Officer Tobin Rourke first saw it during his morning coffee break. Shaky footage of a small puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, being lifted into the air by what looked like 100 colorful helium balloons. The dog's terrified yelps pierced through the excited whoops and cheers of the crowd below. Rourke's coffee grew cold as he watched the clip loop again and again, his weathered face growing darker each time. "This just came in," Officer Chun said, leaning over Rourke's desk. "It's trending everywhere. Location tags point to the riverbank near Wilson Bridge." Rourke was already reaching for his jacket. "Call it in. I'm heading there now." The spring morning was deceptively beautiful as Rourke pulled up to the riverbank. Cherry blossoms dotted the shore, their pink petals scattered across the damp earth, like nature's confetti. But Rourke wasn't here for the scenery. His trained eyes scanned the ground methodically, looking for evidence of what he now considered a serious crime. It didn't take long to find the first pieces. Shreds of ribbon in every color imaginable lay tangled in the grass, some still floating lazily in the morning breeze. Rourke pulled on his gloves and carefully collected each piece, his jaw tightening as he imagined how they had been tied to that poor animal. Near a cluster of rocks, he found what remained of a cheap harness, the kind you'd find at a dollar store, not meant to withstand the force of dozens of helium balloons pulling upward. A small pink tag was still attached to it, the writing faded but visible. Rourke bagged it carefully, knowing it could be crucial evidence, but it was his next discovery that made his heart jump. Half hidden under a bush lay a smartphone, its screen cracked but intact. Rourke photographed it exactly where it lay before collecting it. This wasn't just vandalism or a cruel prank anymore. This was solid evidence of premeditated animal cruelty. Back at the station, Rourke was carefully logging each piece of evidence when Captain Wardell Pike's shadow fell across his desk. "Rourke," Pike said, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that usually preceded an order. "I need you to drop this balloon dog business." Rourke looked up from his evidence reports. "Sir, it's clearly a hoax. Some kid's playing around with special effects for likes and views. We've got real crimes to solve." Pike leaned against Rourke's desk, lowering his voice. "Let it blow over. That's an order." Rourke felt the familiar weight of his badge against his chest. He thought about his father, who'd taught him that doing the right thing wasn't always the easy thing. "With respect, Captain, I've got physical evidence here. The harness, the ribbons, the phone, they're real. And that video showed a real puppy in real distress." Pike's expression hardened. "You're going to make us look like fools chasing viral videos while serious crimes go unsolved. Drop it." But Rourke was already turning back to his evidence bags, methodically cataloging each item. He could feel Pike's disapproving stare boring into his back, but he continued his work. Each piece was photographed, labeled, and carefully stored according to protocol. Finally, he reached for the phone. It was an older model, probably a backup or burner phone. Following procedure, he connected it to a power source, waiting for any signs of life. The screen flickered and a notification preview appeared, a message he knew he shouldn't read yet. Proper chain of custody had to be maintained if this was going to hold up as evidence. As Pike's footsteps faded down the hallway, Rourke sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. The image from the video played again in his mind. That helpless puppy spinning against the blue sky, the balloons creating a twisted rainbow above it. He could still hear the crowd cheering, treating it like some kind of sick entertainment. Drive home that evening was longer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. Rourke's mind kept returning to that moment in Pike's office, the clear line drawn between following orders and following his conscience. His father used to say that a person's character was defined by the small decisions they made when nobody was watching. Well, plenty of people were watching now, but that didn't make the decision any easier. The setting sun painted the city skyline in shades of orange and purple, and somewhere out there, a puppy's fate remained unknown. But Rourke had made his choice. He would follow the evidence wherever it led, even if it meant standing alone. Because sometimes, doing the right thing meant being the only one willing to do it at all. That night, as he hung up his uniform, Rourke couldn't shake the image of those balloons disappearing into the clouds, or the sound of that terrified puppy's cries being drowned out by cheers. He had sworn an oath to protect and serve, and that included the most vulnerable and voiceless victims. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, he knew he'd chosen the right path, even if it was the harder one to walk. Officer Rourke sat at his desk, the court order for accessing the found phone's data finally in his hands. His heart thumped as he connected the device to the department's forensics computer. Within moments, the first text message pinged through, its words making his breath catch. Delete the raw. Brantley wants silence. The name Brantley sparked something in his memory. After a quick search through local business registries, the connection crystallized. Brantley Coyle, the flashy young CEO of Skythread Lux, a company known for its over-the-top promotional events. More importantly, he was the son of Councilman Jerome Coyle, one of the most powerful figures in local politics. Rourke dug deeper, pulling vendor invoices from past Skythread events. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he cross-referenced the phone number from the text. There it was, listed repeatedly on purchase orders for various spectacles and shows. The connection was solid. He needed expert eyes on the physical evidence. Dr. Elodie March's veterinary clinic was modest but immaculately kept. When Rourke walked in with the evidence bags containing the harness and ribbons, she looked up from her paperwork with kind but tired eyes. "Officer Rourke," she said, gesturing to her examination table, "what have you brought me?" He laid out the items carefully. "I need your professional opinion on how these were separated. Was this a planned release or something else?" Dr. March pulled on latex gloves and picked up the harness, her auburn hair falling forward as she leaned in close. Her steady hands traced the torn edges, her expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. "These weren't cut cleanly," she said finally, looking up at him through practical glasses. "See these jagged patterns? The way the fabric is stretched and torn? This comes from panic, from an animal desperately trying to free itself. If this had been a planned release, the cuts would be straight, controlled." Rourke felt his jaw tighten. "You've seen injuries from their events before?" "More than I care to count," she answered quietly. "But speaking up hasn't done much good. The Coyles have friends everywhere." A new lead came through Keely Vuss, a local rescue operator known for her no-nonsense approach to animal welfare. They met in the parking lot of her small shelter, her boots scuffed and her face tanned from long days working outdoors. "Skythread always uses the same balloon supplier," Keely told him, leaning against her weathered rescue van. "Place called Party Palace Wholesale. They've got a warehouse just outside city limits. The delivery manifests might tell you something interesting." Rourke nodded, making notes. "You seem to know a lot about their operations. When you run a rescue, you learn to keep tabs on the folks most likely to create problems for animals." She replied with a knowing look. "I've got eyes and ears everywhere. And I'm happy to help someone finally taking this seriously." Back at the precinct, Captain Pike called Rourke into his office. The captain's face was stern as he closed the door. "What's this I hear about you poking around Skythread Lukes?" Pike's tone was careful, measured. "You're building yourself a nice little investigation team out there." "The vet, the rescue operator. Following the evidence, sir," Rourke replied. Evenly. Pike leaned forward in his chair. "You're following evidence right to Councilman Coyle's doorstep. You understand what that means? Taking on his family could wreck your career. There are smarter battles to pick." "With all due respect, sir, I didn't pick this battle. That puppy didn't ask to be turned into a publicity stunt. This isn't just about a dog anymore, Rourke. Jerome Coyle has been in power longer than you've been on the force. His reach goes deep, and that son of his, Brantley, he's got his father's temper without the political restraint." Rourke stood his ground. "Then maybe it's time someone showed them they're not above the law." As he left Pike's office, Rourke's phone buzzed with messages from both Elodie and Keeley offering additional help. He looked at their names on his screen, then at the evidence phone secured in his desk. 3 points of leverage against what seemed like impossible odds. But it was a start. He thought about Brantley Coyle, probably sitting in his luxury office right now, believing his father's influence would keep him safe. About Jerome Coyle pulling strings from his council chamber. They were used to silence, used to people backing down, but this time was different. This time, the evidence was solid, the witnesses were willing, and Rourke had no intention of letting go. He had sworn an oath to protect, and that included the voiceless victims that others found convenient to ignore. With Elodie's expertise, Keeley's street-smart network, and the damning messages on that phone, he had what he needed to start building a case. The next steps would have to be careful, methodical. The Coyles might have power and influence, but Rourke had something they couldn't buy. People who cared more about doing what was right than doing what was easy. His quiet alliance was forming, and with it, the chance to finally hold the powerful accountable. Officer Tobin Rourke hunched over his computer screen, his eyes burning from hours of scanning through incident reports connected to Skythread events. The more he dug, the more troubling patterns emerged. Case after case showed injuries at their flashy publicity stunts, all neatly buried under thick stacks of non-disclosure agreements. "This can't be coincidence," he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. The reports painted a clear picture. Skythread had a history of cutting corners when it came to safety. An upcoming charity gala hosted by the Coyles caught his attention. Perfect timing. He drafted a routine safety inspection request, careful to keep the language neutral and by the book. No one could argue with standard protocol, especially for an event expecting hundreds of guests. The night of the gala arrived. The mansion's grand entrance lit up like a movie premiere. Rourke adjusted his service uniform and showed his credentials to security. "Just doing a standard safety check," he explained, flashing the approved paperwork. Inside, the opulent ballroom buzzed with Silicon Valley's elite. Rourke kept to the edges watching. That's when he spotted it, a tech runner hurrying past with a familiar black Pelican case. His pulse quickened. He pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo, sending it to Keeley. Her response came back. Within minutes, that's their standard media kit case. Usually holds memory cards, backup drives. Might be worth a closer look. Following the tech runner's path led Rourke to a service corridor away from the main event. The hallway was dimly lit, perfect for someone wanting to stay out of sight. As he rounded a corner, something caught his eye, a small object partially hidden behind a trash bin. Pulling on latex gloves, he carefully retrieved what turned out to be a damaged memory card. His hands nearly shook as he secured it in an evidence bag. This could be exactly what they needed. Back at the station, he properly logged the card into evidence before making a backup copy. The corrupted file took hours to recover, but what emerged made his stomach turn. The footage showed the same puppy from the viral video, its terrified yelps now in crystal clear audio as it spun helplessly in the air. The crowd's excited chanting provided a sickening soundtrack, but the worst part came next. A close-up shot of a gloved hand deliberately sawing at one of the tethers. A voice off camera laughed, "This'll get us so many views." Rourke immediately called Dr. Elodie March. Within the hour, she arrived at the station, her face grim as she watched the recovered footage. "Those stress signals are unmistakable," she said, pointing to the puppy's body language. "The way it's tucking its tail, the whites of its eyes showing. That's genuine fear response. No way this was staged or edited." Rourke felt a mix of vindication and anger. This proves it wasn't just a publicity stunt gone wrong. They deliberately put that dog in danger. Their small victory celebration was cut short by a message from Captain Pike, "My office." Now Pike sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression hard. "We need to talk about optics, Rourke." "Sir, we have solid evidence." "Evidence gathered under questionable circumstances." Pike cut him off. "The Coyle's lawyer already filed a complaint about your presence at the gala. They're claiming harassment." Rourke stood his ground. "The inspection was properly authorized." "Don't play naive," Pike snapped. "We both know what you were really doing there." He leaned forward. "This isn't just about one incident anymore. You're poking a hornet's nest." Walking back to his desk, Rourke could feel eyes on him from around the bullpen. The message was clear. He'd crossed a line, and retaliation wouldn't be far behind. But the memory of that puppy's terrified whimpers from the video steeled his resolve. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone. He carefully organized the new evidence, making sure everything was properly documented and secured. Whatever came next, he'd face it knowing the truth was finally coming to light. The memory card might be damaged, but its contents were intact enough to tell the real story behind Skythread's glossy facade. The retaliation came swiftly and without mercy. Rourke woke to the piercing shriek of fire alarms and the acrid smell of smoke seeping under his apartment door. His heart pounding, he rushed to his window and looked down at the parking lot below. His police cruiser was engulfed in flames. The intense heat shattering windows and melting metal. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, their red lights painting the pre-dawn darkness in urgent flashes. As firefighters battled the blaze, Rourke noticed Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor from across the hall, wringing her hands anxiously near the building's entrance. "Officer Rourke," she called out when she saw him. "I saw something earlier, a white van with that fancy thread logo on it. The one from those big parties? It drove by real slow twice." The arson investigators arrived shortly after, their faces grim as they picked through the charred remains of his vehicle. "Cause undetermined," they concluded after a brief investigation. But Rourke knew better. This was a message, crystal clear in its intent. The second blow fell later that morning. Captain Pike's voice crackled over Rourke's phone, demanding his immediate presence in the office. The captain's face was thunderous as Rourke entered. "Sit down," Pike ordered, his tone clipped. "You've really stepped in at this time, Rourke. The department's received a formal complaint about your conduct at the Coyle Gala. Biased targeting of a constituent. That's serious business." Rourke sat straighter in his chair. "Sir, I was conducting a routine safety inspection. Don't feed me that line." Pike cut him off. "You overstepped, and now you're going to face the consequences. You're suspended, effective immediately. Badge and access card on my desk." With trembling fingers that he fought to steady, Rourke unpinned his badge and placed it alongside his department access card. The metal made a soft click against the wooden desk, a sound that felt like a door closing on his career. But Rourke wasn't done, not by a long shot. He knew exactly who to turn to: Merritt Sloan. a retired detective who'd been forced out years ago for refusing to play political games. He found the older man at his usual spot, a small diner on the edge of town. Merritt listened quietly as Rourke laid out the situation, his weathered face growing increasingly serious. When Rourke finished, the retired detective reached into his worn leather jacket and pulled out what looked like an old access card. "Still works," Merritt said softly, sliding it across the table. "Some things in the system never get updated. But listen close, kid. If the house won't back justice, take it to one that will. You understand what I'm saying?" Rourke nodded slowly, tucking the card away. "The state attorney's animal crimes unit. Smart boy." Merritt sipped his coffee. "Just remember, you didn't get this from me." That evening, Rourke worked frantically in his apartment, cloning his entire body cam archive. Every interaction, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, it all went into a carefully prepared package for the state attorney's office. His hands moved steadily despite his exhaustion, knowing this might be his last chance to make things right. Later. That night, he met Elodie at her veterinary clinic. The lights were dim, and they worked in near silence, hunched over her computer as they analyzed the partial memory card and body cam footage frame by frame. Elodie's fingers flew over the keyboard, isolating voices and marking timestamps. "There," she whispered, pointing to a particular frame. "You can clearly see the person cutting the tether. And listen to this audio. They're laughing about it." Rourke's phone buzzed. A text from Keeley. His eyes widened as he read her message. She'd been digging through purchase records and found something big. Skythread had been making bulk purchases of various gases, including hydrogen. The pieces were falling into place. "This proves it wasn't just a one-time stunt," Rourke said, showing Elodie the message. "They've been planning these kinds of shows for a while." Elodie's face paled as she studied the purchase logs. "Hydrogen? That's incredibly dangerous. One spark and you get a spectacle," Rourke finished grimly. "That's what they're after, isn't it? Bigger, more dramatic shows, no matter the cost." They worked through the night, building their case piece by piece. The evidence was mounting. The recovered phone, the memory card footage, the purchase records, the pattern of incidents. But with each new piece of evidence, Rourke felt the target on his back growing larger. His apartment didn't feel safe anymore. The charred remains of his cruiser in the parking lot served as a constant reminder of what he was up against. But there was no turning back now. He'd chosen his path the moment he'd refused to look the other way, and he would see it through. To the end. As dawn approached, Rourke gathered their findings into secure files. The state attorney's animal crimes unit would receive everything they'd uncovered. If the local department wouldn't act, maybe the state would. It was a gamble, but it was the only play left. Elodie touched his arm gently as he prepared to leave. "Be careful, Tobin. They've already shown what they're willing to do." Rourke nodded, his jaw set with determination. The net was indeed tightening around Skythread and the coils, but the risk was mounting with every step. Yet as he looked at the evidence they'd gathered, he knew it was worth it. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone, or nearly alone, against the tide. The fluorescent lights hummed in Elodie's clinic as she and Rourke hunched over her desktop computer, their faces illuminated by the screen's glow. It was well past midnight, but neither showed signs of fatigue. They had been meticulously aligning audio from multiple sources: Rourke's body cam footage, the recovered memory card, and various social media clips from the incident. "Wait, play that segment again," Elodie said, leaning forward and adjusting her headphones. Rourke clicked back 30 seconds in the timeline. A young woman's voice came through clearly. "Come here, Sprout. Such a good boy." The voice was gentle, caring, a stark contrast to the chaos that would follow. "That's Lyndon Coyle," Rourke said, pausing the playback. "Brantley's younger sister. She's barely mentioned in any of the company materials, but I recognized her from family photos in the background of press coverage." Elodie nodded, making a note. She called the puppy Sprout. That's the first time we've heard its name. They continued through the footage, synchronizing timestamps across different angles. Then they found it, an unpublished clip that made their blood run cold. The shaky video showed a trembling employee, soaked to the waist, dragging a wet puppy from the wake of a passing barge. The small dog was alive, coughing up water but breathing. Then came Brantley Coyle's voice, sharp and cold. "Finish it. We can't risk charges." Elodie's hand flew to her mouth. Rourke sat back in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. The truth hit them both at once. This wasn't a stunt gone wrong. It was deliberate cruelty followed by an intentional cover-up. "They tried to make it look like an accident," Elodie whispered, her voice shaking with anger. "But Sprout survived. The fall. And Brantley." She couldn't finish the sentence. Rourke pushed back from the desk, pacing the small office. "This changes everything. It's not just animal cruelty anymore. It's evidence tampering, conspiracy." He stopped suddenly, turning to Elodie. "The warehouse. We need to move on the warehouse." He pulled out his laptop and began drafting an affidavit for code enforcement. Hours of research with Keeley had revealed Skythread's bulk purchases of hydrogen gas, far more than any legitimate event company would need. Combined with their documented violations of records retention policies, it gave them the leverage they needed. "Look at this," he said, showing Elodie the completed document. "Illegal storage of hazardous materials, multiple violations of safety protocols, failure to maintain required documentation. Judge Martinez is on duty tomorrow. She's always been sympathetic to animal welfare cases." Elodie read through the affidavit, nodding. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "When you execute the warrant, you'll need someone who can identify and evaluate any animals on site." "Already ahead of you," Rourke replied, pulling out his phone. "Keeley's lining up transport crates. She's got a whole network of rescues on standby." The plan was taking shape. With the warrant, they could seize devices and documents, effectively stopping the next planned balloon release. More importantly, they could finally establish the chain of evidence linking directly to the Coyles. Elodie played the clip one more time. Sprout being pulled from the water. Brantley's damning orders. "That poor puppy," she said softly. "All for some social media stunt." "We're going to make it right," Rourke assured her, though his voice was heavy with the weight of what they'd discovered. "The truth's out now. Sprout survived, and their attempt to cover it up is going to be their undoing." Judge Martinez signed the warrant early the next morning. Her face was grim as she reviewed the evidence, particularly the documentation of hydrogen gas storage. "Be careful," she warned as she handed over the signed document. "People who would hurt an animal to protect their image won't hesitate to hurt you too." Within hours, their small team was preparing for the raid. Keeley arrived with a convoy of animal transport vehicles strategically parked out of sight of the warehouse. Elodie double-checked her medical kit, ready to treat any animals they might find. Rourke coordinated with the warrant service team, making sure everyone understood their roles. The evidence was clear, the warrant was signed, and their team was in place. What had started as a viral video of a cruel stunt had unveiled something far darker. But now they had the truth, and the legal authority to act on it. Sprout's story wasn't over yet, and neither was their fight for justice. The warehouse loomed before them, a stark industrial building that held secrets they were finally about to uncover. Rourke looked at his team, Elodie with her medical kit, Keeley directing rescue vehicles into position, the warrant service team checking their gear. The piece of paper in his hand represented more than just legal permission to enter the premises. It was their chance to expose the truth and prevent more animals from suffering the same fate as Sprout. The truth about Sprout's survival and Brantley's subsequent cover-up attempt had transformed what seemed like a reckless publicity stunt into something far more sinister. As they prepared to execute the warrant, Each member of the team knew that this was their chance to finally bring the full story to light and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. As Rourke pulled into the warehouse parking lot, his personal vehicle felt strange compared to his usual patrol car, but being suspended meant adapting. A cluster of code enforcement vehicles were already positioned around the perimeter, their yellow lights flashing silently in the dawn. Officer Marcus Chen from Code Enforcement approached as Rourke stepped out. "Got your temporary credentials?" "From the state attorney's office," he said, handing over a lanyard with an ID badge. "Civilian investigator status. Should keep things clean and legal." Rourke nodded, slipping the lanyard around his neck. The weight of the badge felt different from his police shield, but it would have to do. He spotted Elodie's veterinary van pulling up, followed by Keely's rescue transport. "Everyone clear on their assignments?" Rourke asked as the team gathered. The code enforcement officers nodded, clutching their clipboards and cameras. Elodie adjusted her medical kit while Keely distributed evidence bags and tags. "Remember," Rourke continued, "we're here officially for hazardous materials violations and records compliance. Document everything exactly as you find it." The warehouse door opened with a metallic groan. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing long aisles of industrial shelving. The smell of rubber and metal filled the air. Teams spread out methodically, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. In the first section, Rourke found what they were looking for: rows of hydrogen canisters, many without proper warning labels or safety protocols posted. He photographed each one carefully, making sure to capture the serial numbers. "Rourke," called Chun from a nearby office, "you need to see this." Inside the small room, Chun pointed to an open laptop and scattered paperwork. "Spreadsheets," he explained. "Purchase orders for the hydrogen, all tied to accounts under Councilman Coyle's staff names." Rourke's heart beat faster as he photographed the documents. This was the connection they needed, direct evidence linking the Coyles to the illegal gas purchases. A cry from Elodie drew their attention to the back of the warehouse. They found her standing before a row of metal crates, her face pale with anger. Inside each one was an animal: puppies, kittens, even a small monkey, all tagged, with cards reading, "Reveal conditioning." "They're preparing them for more stunts," Elodie said, her voice shaking as she examined a trembling retriever puppy. "Some show signs of sedation. They're being stored here until they're needed for events." Keely immediately began documenting the animal's conditions, attaching chain of custody tags to each crate. Her rescue team stood ready with transport carriers, waiting for clearance to move the animals to safety. Rourke continued through the warehouse, cataloging everything they found. Racks of colorful ribbons and harnesses lined one wall, along with professional cameras and lighting equipment. In the corner, he spotted what looked like a server cage, secured with heavy locks. "Need bolt cutters over here," he called out, photographing the cage from all angles. Inside, he could see racks of hard drives and memory cards, potential gold mines of evidence. For a moment, standing in the middle of the warehouse, Rourke felt a surge of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The raid was clean and coordinated, exactly what he'd been working toward. They had the paper trail connecting the Coyles, physical evidence of animal abuse, and soon they'd have whatever was stored on those servers. But then he noticed the floor manager, a thin man in a company polo shirt, standing by the office door. The man's phone was pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on the server cage. Though Rourke couldn't hear the conversation, something in the manager's posture made his instincts flare. The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted subtly. What had felt like a smooth, professional operation suddenly took on an edge of tension. Rourke watched the floor manager end his call, noting how the man's hand shook slightly as he lowered the phone. Several code enforcement officers seemed to sense it too, exchanging glances as they continued their work. Elodie looked up from examining another crated animal, her expression questioning. Keely paused in her documentation, pen hovering over a custody form. The procedural calm of the morning had evaporated, replaced by something more volatile. But they kept working, maintaining their professional facade while quietly staying alert. They had come too far to let anything compromise this operation. Now teams continued moving methodically through the warehouse, collecting evidence and documenting violations. The bolt cutters arrived for the server cage, and Rourke supervised as tech specialists began disconnecting the equipment for transport. Elodie and her team prepared the rescued animals for safe removal, while Keely ensured every piece of evidence was properly tagged and logged. They had what they came for: proof of the coil's involvement, evidence of their illegal operations, and most importantly, animals saved from future stunts. But Rourke couldn't shake the feeling that the floor manager's phone call had set something in motion, something that could threaten everything they'd worked to accomplish. A sudden flash of movement caught Rourke's eye. The floor manager had disappeared into a side office, his phone pressed urgently to his ear. Something about the man's furtive glance made Rourke's police instincts flare to life. The first sign that something was wrong came when the security lights flickered and died, plunging sections of the warehouse into shadow. Rourke's head snapped up as a strange hissing sound echoed from somewhere in the maze of overhead pipes. "Everyone out!" He shouted, but his warning came too late. A bright flare arced through the air, landing beneath the catwalk piping. In that split second, Rourke's training kicked in. He recognized the sickly sweet smell of hydrogen gas mixing with air. The static electricity from the flare was all it took. The explosion ripped through the warehouse with devastating force. Metal shrieked as a massive fireball punched upward, tearing through the ceiling panels like they were paper. Burning debris rained down as Rourke lunged toward Elodie, who stood frozen near the server cage. "Move!" he yelled, shoving her roughly through a side hatch. His hands found a crate of whimpering puppies nearby, and he dropped to the floor with it just as a wave of flaming wreckage crashed down where he'd been standing moments before. The heat was intense, blistering his exposed skin as he crawled through the thickening smoke. He could barely see, but he could hear Elodie coughing somewhere ahead. Keeping one hand on the crate, he used the other to feel his way forward, guiding them both toward where he remembered the exit being around them. Code enforcement officers were dragging other animal crates toward safety. The air grew hotter, more toxic with each passing second. Rourke's lungs burned as he pushed onward, encouraging Elodie to keep moving. A deafening crack split the air as one of the main support beams gave way. Through the smoke, Rourke watched in horror as the server cage, containing all their vital evidence, collapsed into a heap of twisted melting metal. Everything they'd worked to uncover, all the proof linking the coils to their crimes, was being destroyed before their eyes. They finally burst through an exit door into the blessed, cool morning air. Outside, emergency vehicles were already arriving, their sirens wailing into the dawn. Industrial foam cannons mounted on fire trucks began spraying massive white arcs of fire-suppressing foam onto the burning building. Rourke sank to his knees, still clutching the crate of rescued puppies. His arms and face stung from various burns. But he was alive. They all were human and animal alike. Emergency medical technicians swarmed around them, checking for injuries and administering oxygen. The warehouse continued to burn despite the firefighters' best efforts. With a groaning sound that seemed to come from deep within its foundations, the entire structure began to buckle. They watched as it slowly crumpled in on itself, taking with it the physical backbone of their case against the coils. Elodie placed a gentle hand on Rourke's shoulder as they stared at the smoking ruins. The other team members gathered around them, faces grim with understanding. They had managed to save lives today, both human and animal, but the price had been steep. All their carefully gathered evidence, the proof they'd needed for court, was now nothing but ash. "The servers," Elodie whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Everything we found," Rourke nodded silently. The weight of their loss settled over the group as they watched firefighters battle the remaining flames. They had known the coils would fight back, but none of them had expected this level of destruction. The message was clear: the powerful family would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Through the chaos of emergency vehicles and first responders, Rourke could see news vans beginning to arrive. Soon this would be the top story: a mysterious explosion at a warehouse under investigation. But without their evidence, how could they prove it was more than just an accident? The morning sun continued to rise over the industrial park, illuminating the destruction in harsh detail. The team stood together, covered in soot and nursing minor injuries, coming to terms with this devastating setback. They had saved lives today, but their chance at justice seemed to have gone up in flames along with the warehouse. Rourke sat in Elodie's veterinary clinic, wincing as she carefully applied burn ointment to his blistered forearms. The morning news played quietly on a wall-mounted television, showing aerial footage of the smoldering warehouse ruins. And in breaking news, the anchor announced, what investigators are calling a tragic act of vandalism has destroyed a local events company warehouse. SkyThread Luke spokesman Bradley Coyle expressed shock at the targeting of their facility. The camera cut to Brantley Coyle, perfectly composed in an expensive suit, speaking to reporters. "This senseless destruction appears connected to a suspended police officer's unauthorized harassment of our company. We're grateful no one was seriously injured, and we look forward to cooperating with legitimate authorities to find those responsible." Elodie's hands stilled. "They're spinning it already. Making you the bad guy." Rourke barely heard her, his attention caught by the next segment showing Captain Pike at police headquarters. His former boss stood at a podium, distancing himself. "And the department from the investigation. Officer Rourke's actions were neither sanctioned nor supported by this department," Pike stated firmly. "His suspension remains in effect pending review. We condemn any violation of proper procedure or targeting of local businesses." "Hold still," Elodie murmured as Rourke shifted angrily. She finished wrapping his burns in clean gauze. "You need rest. These aren't minor injuries." But Rourke was already reaching for his phone with his less injured hand. "They're burying it. All of it. The animal abuse, the illegal gas storage, everything." His fingers moved across the screen, navigating through folders of files he'd been safeguarding. "What are you thinking?" Elodie asked, recognizing the determined set of his jaw. "Something unthinkable for a cop." He looked up at her. "I'm going to release everything. My body cam footage from day one. Internal emails showing Pike's interference. The warehouse inspection videos, all of it." Elodie sat back, understanding dawning. "That would end your career." "My career ended the moment Pike suspended me." Rourke's voice was quiet but firm. "But maybe the truth can still do some good." His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Keeley. "News is bad, but I have something that might help. Coming over." 20 minutes later, Keeley burst through the clinic's back door, laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Her face was flushed with excitement, despite the grim situation. "Before you do anything drastic," she said, pulling out her computer, "you should know I kept an off-site cloud backup of everything we found on that partial memory card. Plus all the purchase logs linking SkyThread to the illegal gas buys." Hope flickered in Rourke's chest. "How much?" "It's thin," Keeley admitted, "but viable. Enough to support other evidence. Like, say, body cam footage from a certain principled officer." Rourke nodded slowly. "Let's do it, all of it." For the next hour, they worked together, Keeley handling the technical aspects, Elodie providing her veterinary documentation of injured animals from past events, and Rourke organizing his extensive body cam archives and internal communications. They created a comprehensive digital package, adding context and timestamps to make the story clear to the public. "Last chance to reconsider," Elodie said softly as Rourke's finger hovered over the upload button. "This really will be the end of your police career." "Some things matter more than a badge," he replied, and pressed send. The effect was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the footage went viral. Social media erupted with outrage as people watched the systematic pattern of animal abuse, the attempted cover-ups, and the department's efforts to silence the investigation. Local news stations picked up the story, running clips of Rourke's body cam footage alongside their earlier coverage of the vandalism. By evening, the state attorney general's office announced they were taking over the investigation, citing clear evidence of criminal activity and possible corruption. Pike was placed on administrative leave pending review of his actions, but the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lyndon Coyle, watching the footage spread across every screen in the city, finally broke her silence. The memories of Sprout, the helpless puppy she'd named, combined with the horror of the warehouse fire, proved too much for her conscience to bear. Through her personal attorney, she contacted the state prosecutor's office. Her message was simple but devastating. She would testify about her brother Brantley's direct orders regarding animal abuse and evidence destruction, including his command to finish it when Sprout survived the initial fall, in exchange for protection from family retaliation. Back at the clinic, Rourke sat with his friends as messages and updates poured in. His phone buzzed with the official notice of his termination from the police force, but it was immediately followed by a call from the state attorney general's office requesting his cooperation as a civilian witness. "How are you feeling?" Elodie asked, checking his bandages again. Rourke looked at his wrapped arms, then at the screens showing the public's growing awareness and demand for justice. "Like I finally did my job right." Keeley, monitoring the online response, smiled. "The truth has a way of finding the light. Sometimes it just needs a little help." They sat together in the quiet clinic, watching as the story they'd fought so hard to expose finally broke through to the world. Rourke had lost his badge, but he'd kept his oath to protect the innocent. Sometimes he realized that was worth any price. The flood of public support and official action confirmed what they'd known all along. The truth, once fully revealed, had the power to shake even the strongest foundations of power. The path to justice, hidden for so long behind threats and influence, was finally opening before them. The harbor glowed with thousands of lights strung across the event space as Skythread's annual gala got underway. Despite the recent warehouse fire and swirling rumors, Brantley Coyle had insisted on proceeding with what he called a tribute balloon display. Massive white balloons swayed gently in the evening breeze, tethered to the ground by thick ropes. Rourke stood at the edge of the growing crowd, his bandaged arms hidden beneath a dark jacket. Without his badge, he felt strangely light, but the USB drive in his pocket carried a different kind of weight. Beside him, Keeley monitored her laptop, making sure their off-site backups were ready to stream to the giant screens Skythread had set up around the harbor. "Everything's in place," she whispered, typing final commands. "The state attorney's team is in position." Through the crowd, Rourke spotted deputies in plain clothes moving quietly into strategic positions. The fire marshal and his team were doing their final checks of the gas lines that would fill the massive balloon display. They knew what to look for now: the illegal hydrogen that had nearly killed them all at the warehouse on the main stage. Brantley Coyle stepped up to the microphone, perfectly groomed in an expensive suit. "Welcome, everyone. Tonight's display will be our most spectacular yet, a tribute to the power of dreams and imagination." The crowd applauded politely, many of them wealthy donors who'd supported Skythread's previous events. Councilman Jerome Coyle stood near the front, nodding proudly at his son's presentation. "The countdown begins in 5 minutes, Brantley announced. "Please direct your attention to our screens for a special preview of tonight's show." That was their cue. Keeley's fingers flew across the keyboard, and suddenly the screens flickered. Instead of the planned promotional video, raw footage began to play, crystal clear and damning. The audience watched in growing horror as the video showed a gloved hand deliberately cutting through safety harnesses. Brantley's voice rang out. Clearly, make sure there's no evidence. The footage jumped to the incident with Sprout, the terrified puppy spinning above the city while crowds cheered below. Turn that off. Brantley screamed from the stage, but his voice was drowned out by gasps from the crowd as purchase logs began scrolling alongside the footage, showing repeated orders for illegal hydrogen gas, all tied to Skythread accounts. The fire marshals team moved swiftly, shutting down the gas lines before they could be activated. Deputies emerged from the crowd, warrant papers in hand. The state attorney herself stepped onto the stage. Brantley Coyle, you're under arrest for multiple counts of animal cruelty, evidence tampering, and criminal endangerment, she announced. Into the microphone. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. Brantley shouted, backing away. But his face had gone pale as more footage played, his own voice ordering staff to finish it when Sprout survived the fall. 2 deputies moved in with handcuffs. The more Brantley protested, the more his denials seemed to confirm every accusation. The cuffs clicked shut around his wrists as he continued to shout. In the front row, Councilman Jerome Coyle's face had turned ashen. On the screens above, financial records flashed, direct links between his personal accounts and the illegal gas purchases, the payoffs, the cover-ups. His carefully constructed world of influence and impunity was crumbling in real time. Through the chaos, Elodie and her team moved efficiently among the staging areas, finding crates of animals intended for the night's tribute. They worked quickly, transferring scared creatures to proper transport carriers. Each animal rescued was another piece of evidence, another count to add to the charges. The crowd that had gathered for a spectacular show stood in stunned silence. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness as journalists captured the moment the mighty coils fell. The massive white balloons swayed uselessly overhead, their planned dramatic release now just another piece of evidence in a growing case. Local news crews, already on site to cover the gala, turned their cameras from the planned celebration to the arrests taking place. The Coils' carefully maintained image of untouchable power dissolved under the harsh glare of spotlights and justice. In the stillness that followed, Rourke watched as both Brantley and Jerome Coyle were led away by deputies. The father and son, who had seemed invincible just hours before, now looked small and ordinary in the flashing lights of police vehicles. The truth had finally broken through, not in the quiet of an evidence room or the formality of a courtroom, but here, in the very public space where the Coils had planned another spectacular display of their apparent untouchability. Instead, they had provided the backdrop for their own downfall. The harbor air was heavy with the weight of shattered illusions. The same crowd that had gathered to cheer another Skythread spectacle now witnessed the dismantling of the corruption that had made those shows possible. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived on this warm harbor night. The packed courthouse fell silent as Judge Marion delivered her verdict. On the charge of felony animal cruelty, this court finds the defendant, Brantley Coyle, guilty. She paused, her stern gaze fixed on the man who had once seemed untouchable. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. Brantley's face drained of color as the weight of justice finally landed. In the gallery, Rourke felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also a lingering sadness for Sprout, the puppy whose fate had started it all. The dominoes continued to fall in the weeks that followed. Jerome Coyle's carefully constructed world of influence crumbled as corruption indictments piled up. The investigation revealed a web of illegal payments, covered-up incidents, and misused city funds. The councilman's polished facade cracked under the scrutiny of state prosecutors. Captain Pike's resignation came next. submitted quietly one morning as internal affairs circled closer to his role in suppressing the initial investigation. The department was in upheaval, trying to rebuild trust with the community. It was during this time of transition that Chief Martinez called Rourke into her office. The new department head sat behind her desk, a reinstatement letter placed carefully between them. "We want you back, Rourke," she said simply. "The force needs officers with your integrity." Rourke looked at the letter, remembering the weight of his badge. But something had shifted inside him during this journey. "I appreciate the offer, Chief, but I think I can do more good somewhere else." She nodded, unsurprised. "You have something in mind?" "An animal crimes task force," he explained, leaning forward. "Working as a civilian investigator, partnering with the state unit. There are too many cases that fall through the cracks." The chief smiled. "You always did see the bigger picture." The next few months were a whirlwind of building something new. Rourke secured office space, established protocols, and began forming partnerships with local rescue organizations. Keeley was the first to sign on as the task force's rescue liaison, bringing her vast network of contacts and practical experience. "We'll do it right this time," she said, arranging transport crates in their new facility. No more looking the other way. But it wasn't all about work. The connection that had sparked between Rourke and Elodie during the investigation had grown stronger. Through shared purpose and understanding, they found themselves spending more time together, first over case files, then over coffee, then over quiet dinners where they talked about everything and nothing. One evening, while visiting the shelter where the rescued sky thread animals were being rehabilitated, they stopped at a particular kennel. Inside, a young dog with gentle eyes watched them hopefully. "He was one of the ones from the warehouse," Elodie said softly. "The night of the fire." Rourke knelt down, and the dog immediately pressed against the kennel door, tail wagging. Something about his resilient spirit, his ability to trust despite everything, touched something deep in Rourke's heart. "What do you think about giving him a home?" he asked Elodie, her eyes lit up. "I think it's perfect. We could call him Harbor, because he's finally found safe harbor with us." The adoption papers were signed the next day. Harbor adapted to his new life with enthusiasm, dividing his time between Rourke's apartment and Elodie's house until they realized it made more sense to share one home. The final piece of closure came during the corruption trial, when Lyndon Coyle took the stand. The youngest member of the Coyle family had carried the weight of silence for too long. "I was taught that family loyalty came before everything," she testified, her voice steady despite her brother's glare from the defendant's table. "But what happened to Sprout and all the other animals? It wasn't right. When Brantley ordered that puppy to be," she paused, gathering strength, "to be disposed of after the fall, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Our family's code of silence protected cruelty, and I won't be part of that anymore." Her testimony broke the last barrier of denial and marked a true end to Skythread's reign of spectacle over safety. The balloon launches that had once dominated city celebrations were permanently grounded. Months later, Rourke sat at his desk in the task force office, reviewing case files for their newest investigation. Harbor dozed peacefully at his feet, occasionally sighing contentedly in his sleep. On the wall hung photos of successful rescues and newspaper clippings about their work. A framed picture showed him and Elodie at Harbor's adoption day, all three of them looking happier than they'd ever imagined possible. The weight of Sprout's fate would always be part of him, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it had transformed into a driving force, pushing him to prevent similar tragedies and save as many animals as he could. Each successful case, each animal rescued, each abuser brought to justice, it all honored the memory of that first tiny puppy whose story had changed everything. The office was quiet, except for Harbor's soft breathing and the gentle rustle of papers as Rourke worked. This was where he belonged, doing work that mattered, surrounded by love and purpose. The path here hadn't been easy, but sitting in this moment of peace, he knew it had led exactly where he needed to be. If something today spoke to the part of you that still believes in love, stay a while. Subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story worth feeling.